Hi everyone, welcome to Random Thoughts with Alex. In this video I'm going to try to do something a little different. Instead of talking about science topic or science fiction topics, I would like to talk about music. And the reason for bringing up this subject is this gentleman over here, Andy Edwards. Andy Edwards is one of my favorite YouTubers, and he recently made quite an interesting video about the 10 essential Frank Zappa albums. And I'll let him explain what the purpose is of his video.
Zappa then went on to make another 70 albums until he died in 1993. And since he's died, being a very prolific musician, the Zappa Family Trust has brought out another 70 or 80 albums. So anybody who wants to explore Frank's catalogue will find it a little bit daunting. What albums are you going to get? Which ones are you going to get first? So I thought it would be useful to come up with 10 albums that I think are the essential albums that you need to own if you're a Frank Zappa fan. Albums that will give you not only a good idea of the whole, all the aspects of his career, but also will be some of the greatest albums he ever made. And also for them to be accessible as well, so that you're not feeling like you've bought something which is artistically very interesting, but is hard to work out. Because some of Zappa's stuff can be very, very experimental, of course. But other stuff can be very catchy. He's great at writing hooks. He's great at writing drum beats. He may do it with a steer and a snarl, but he is still a master of melody and a master of groove. Zappa was unlike anybody else. There is nobody comparable to him in the sort of annals of rock music history. And so this has been a difficult task, and I'm having to juggle a lot of different parameters all at the same time.
I think that sums up Andy's objective and also his dilemma in this video. If you want to summarize Frank Zappa's work in 10 albums, and you also want them to be accessible and among the best ones and representative of all the kind of work that Zappa has done, it's almost impossible, particularly if you want to cater to a new audience that's not familiar with Frank Zappa's music. So I think that was a great idea, but also a huge challenge. So when I thought about it, I came to the conclusion that while I think Andy's selection here was very good, I would probably have selected some different albums. For some of them I agree, some of them I disagree, and I thought I'd make a response video about that. I've always wanted to make response videos, just never got to it, and I think this is a good opportunity to start. Andy Edwards, this is one of his more serious videos, but some of his videos are actually very funny. He improvises a lot in very unexpected ways, absolutely delightful to watch. So what I'll do is I'll go through the list as Andy presents them, and then I'll give my comments and, if necessary, some alternatives to the selections that Andy has made. So the first album selected by Andy is Uncle Meat. This is a album from the late 60s, representing the first couple of years that Frank Zappa made albums. I think it's a good album, but for my taste, it's a little too chaotic, a little too disjointed to be one of his best albums. Now, a little chaotic and a little disjointed is how Andy's videos sometimes work, so I think in that sense it's a suitable choice for him, but I would have chosen a different one. So my alternative is a album that Andy actually talks about himself. So maybe let's very briefly go to what Andy had to say about the album that I would have chosen.
There's a part of me that wants to put in Absolutely Free, which is a single album, and he's just perfect. He never does a wrong step on that album.
So there it is. Absolutely Free is a album where Zappa didn't make a step wrong, and that's essentially the reason I would choose that album instead. So, Absolutely Free is Frank Zappa's second album, came out shortly after he made Freak Out. That was his debut album. Absolutely Free came out in 1967. It's a very accessible album. It's one of his best satirical albums. And I think that's something I want to talk about in this video is that Frank Zappa sometimes has a tendency to be overly satirical. He's so satirical that things get, the satire gets in the way of the music and it becomes contrived and not actually that pleasant to listen to, at least for my taste. But that is not the case in Absolutely Free. I think that's where he really uh, judged it very well, dosed the satire very well in a way that doesn't take away from the artistry. When we look at the list of songs on the album, I think here the Duke of Prunes and Call Any Vegetable are two of my favorite songs on this album. Duke of Prunes is kind of a Dadaist, almost meaningless, absurd song. Call Any Vegetable is part of the satire of how people essentially form relationships or what are their criteria of forming friendships and relationships. It's kind of a very incisive song in that sense. Musically, these two songs kind of form intertwining themes that go through many of the songs early on in the album, and that's actually musically very interesting. Two other interesting songs on this album are here's number 11, Status Back Baby, and Brown Shoes Don't Make It. These are musically very interesting songs. For instance, Status Back Baby has a piece of Stravinsky as the instrumental break. So it's a very poppy song, and so Zappa kind of sneaks in a little bit of Stravinsky into um, a very accessible song. Brown Shoes Don't Make It is musically very interesting. It has kind of edgy lyrics, but that's something Zappa did, so there should not be a big surprise there. So that's about it for the first album. So instead of Uncle Meat, I choose Absolutely Free. Let's go to Andy's second selection.
This album is another album which you can't really call yourself a Zappa fan unless you own this album. This is a
And here I think Andy absolutely nails it. This is an album, an absolutely essential album for any Zappa fan. It's mostly an instrumental album. It's very jazzy, but it's actually a very accessible album. I think Frank Zappa describes this album probably best in his book, The Real Frank Zappa Book. Yes, so Frank Zappa wrote a book. Well, it was ghostwritten by someone else, but it was based on interviews. And the way he describes this album kind of sarcastically is as follows. The very idea, an all-instrumental album except for one vocal cut, and that had to feature Captain Beefheart. He's not a singer. Why are you wasting America's precious time, you asshole? That's how Frank Zappa described the album and why it was not more popular in the United States. But as Andy mentions in his video, and I strongly recommend that you watch his entire video, is that this album was actually a hit in the UK and I believe also in the Netherlands. So the one cut, the song sung by Captain Beefheart, is interesting because by Captain Beefheart, who is a very well-known musician in his own right, who's made some very classic albums, uh, some of which Andy has talked about in some of his videos. Beefheart was actually a high school friend of Frank Zappa, so that's how they got to know each other. Some of the classic songs on Hot Rats, and let's go to the Wikipedia page to look at that. Here, Peaches and Regalia is one of the main ones. Another one is here, Son of Mr. Green Jeans. So I'd say that the first side of um, Hot Rats is kind of jazz rock fusion type music, and then on the second half, the second side, it becomes even more jazzy. But it's as I said, it's actually very accessible. Peaches and Regalia is a song that you can find in my random music mix. If you go to my channel and you go to playlists, you'll see there is a playlist called Random Music Mix, which gives you a sense of my favorite music, and Peaches and Regalia is on there. This is definitely one of Frank Zappa's best albums, so strongly recommended for people who want to know more about his music. So let's go to the third album that Andy selected. And the third album selected by Andy is The Grand Wazoo. Now, this is a selection that I don't agree with. I personally I don't like big band music, and this is big band music, so that's why I wouldn't have chosen this one. No doubt it's a very good album. Andy knows a lot more about music than I do. He is himself a musician. He was a drummer with Robert Plant. He's played in some progressive rock bands. He's also been an academic teaching music at college. So who am I to disagree with him? But I do have my own taste, which happens to be different, somewhat different than Andy. So I'm going to give you my own preference. So instead of Grand Wazoo, I would choose Waka Jawaka, which is an album that Andy talks about in the same context as the Grand Wazoo. But to me, this is a more pleasant album to listen to. Particularly the first side is one song. It's called Big Swifty. It has a huge guitar solo on there. It's again quite of a jazzy type album, but it's a very uh, pleasant album to listen to, and I think it's, for my taste at least, a better choice than the Grand Wazoo. But that's purely subjective. I don't have much else to say about this album, so let's move on to the next album, the fourth album selected by Andy. And that album is Roxy and Elsewhere. Again, it's an excellent choice actually. This one is a really excellent choice, but it's not the one that I end up choosing. This is a live album of one of the last lineups of the Mothers of Invention, the group of Frank Zappa before he went exclusively solo. I think it is actually a very good choice for beginners, and it is a absolutely essential album for the hardcore fans. So why am I not choosing this one? Well, the main reason is a song that Andy mentions in this video, and that is Inca Roads. Inca Roads, actually there is a version of Inca Roads on my random music mix on my channel, so if you want to hear it, you can check that out. I believe Inca Roads is Zappa's most memorable song. It's like the most iconically Frank Zappa style song, and I think it has to be in the collection somewhere, and it's not on Roxy and elsewhere. So I figured maybe there's another choice that we could make, and actually Andy considered making a different choice, and that would have been One Size Fits All, which many people believe is Frank Zappa's best album, as Andy mentions, and I think I would agree with that actually. I think that would have been a very good choice. I still remember when I heard this album for the first time, and I was really blown away by it. And that was 35 years ago, and I can still remember it as if it was yesterday. I particularly remember when you get to the end of the first song, Anchor Roads, the iconic song, and then it segues into the next song, which is called Ain't Got No Shoes, or something to that effect. It's a very bizarre segue from one bizarre song to another one. And at just at that precise moment, my mother came into my room and was like, "What? What kind of music is that?" So maybe that adds to the memory. It was kind of fun to have that experience. Now, eventually, Andy didn't choose this album, and one of the reasons he mentions is the album has a sagging middle. And I listened to the album again. I hadn't listened to it for years, and he's right. The middle part of that album is not as strong as the beginning or the ending. Also, it sounds very dated. Actually, it sounded very dated 35 years ago when I hear it for the first time. It sounds even more dated now. But that's not the issue. The issue is that there's some less strong songs uh, on the album that are kind of filler material. The start with Anchor Roads is amazing, and towards the end there's more amazing songs, and so that way you get the impression that the whole album is amazing, but there are songs on there that in isolation would not be considered amazing. So in that sense, I can see the reason for not selecting it, although even Anna Karenina has a sagging middle, so if even Tolstoy could afford to have filler material in the middle of one of his most famous books, why not Frank Zappa on one of his albums? Nevertheless, I felt Anchor Roads had to be in there somewhere, and so I couldn't choose Roxy and Elsewhere. And after thinking some more, I realized there's actually another song that is on Roxy and Elsewhere that is not on One Size Fits All, and that's Echidna's Arf of You. It's also very iconic as Frank Zappa piece. It's an instrumental piece. And that brought me to a different live album. You Can't Do That on Stage Anymore, Volume 2. That is a registration of a concert in Helsinki, actually multiple concerts that were fitted together. And it is it was recorded probably shortly after Roxy and Elsewhere was recorded, when the musicians had a little more time to practice and master the music even more than they do on Roxy and Elsewhere. And it's quite amazing to hear them race through some of these very difficult songs as if it's nothing. And most importantly, it has Anchor Roads and it has Echidna's Arf. Also, what's really interesting is the guitar solo that is on You Can't Do That on Stage Anymore for the song Anchor Roads, which has lots of epic guitar solos in the many variations that Frank Zappa has played, but the particular one that was played in Helsinki also shows up in abridged form on the album One Size Fits All. So you might as well go for the original on the live album here, and that's You Can't Do That on Stage Anymore. So what this album shows you how incredibly good this group is that he was playing with, the musicians that he was playing with at the time, and also how much of a good time people were having. The musicians were having during this concert. That's actually uh, very. It's just very a lot of fun to listen to. So here is a list of the songs. So I think Inca Roads, Rudanzel, Village of the Song of the Sun, Echidnas Arf. Um, those are all amazing songs. Cheapness is very fun because of the introduction, but also it's kind of funny. It's almost sounds like a heavy metal song in a sense, even though it's not meant to be heavy metal at all. Second album, Satuma, is quite impressive. This is a Finnish tango that um, the band had never played before, and so they just took the sheet music and they played it off the sheet. It just showed how amazing musicians these people are. As I said, these are amazing musicians, and it actually brings me to something that I want to talk about on this video. There's a bit of a gap in Andy's video and in several of his other videos, as far as I can tell. Andy never seems to mention Ruth Underwood. Andy, how can you be so negligent? Ruth Underwood, she's a percussionist for crying out loud. So, Andy, if you're watching, please, can you do a video about Ruth Underwood? She's such an amazing musician. And if you do, maybe you won't forget mentioning her in the future when it would be the right time to do so. She is a classically trained musician who was introduced to Zappa's music when he was playing in New York. Actually, what's interesting is on the album Uncle Meat, which was in Andy's list, there's a little conversation between Frank Zappa and I believe Jimmy Carl Black about where the musicians are complaining that they're not doing enough gigs, they're not making enough money to live in New York, and New York is a very expensive city. If they were in California, they would be able to afford living there, but then they wouldn't be doing as many concerts. At the time this recording was made, that was the time essentially when Ruth Underwood discovered the music of Frank Zappa through these live events. That was in 1967. So after that, Ruth Underwood played percussion in a band called the Hamilton Phase. Actually, there's a recording of the Hamilton Phase in my random music mix. So go to my channel, go to the playlists, and you'll find the Hamilton Phase in there. It's quite interesting, very jazzy, but a very soulful kind of jazz music. So a few years later, she started touring with Frank Zappa, and she toured with them for a couple of years. And in my opinion, those are the best years of the Mothers of Invention. And Ruth Underwood essentially stopped playing music after that. And particularly when Zappa passed away, she felt there was nothing left worth playing because she thought the only music that's good enough to play is Frank Zappa's music. And I find it really unfortunate that she made that choice because she is such an amazing musician who could have enriched many, a lot more music than just Frank Zappa's music. But that's the choice she made, unfortunately. So much for this album, so let's move on to the next one. And album number 5 on Andy's list is Lather. This album kind of covers the same time, roughly speaking, as the previous album. Some music made before Roxy and Elsewhere, some music made after Roxy and Elsewhere. It is a good album. There's a lot of great material on there, but it covers such disjointed parts of Frank Zappa's musical career that I don't find that it is a coherent album, and that's I have this album and I rarely listen to it just because it feels too chaotic to me. I guess Andy's a more chaotic type of person, so it makes a lot of sense that he puts it on his list. But I'm not going to have it in my list. Instead, I'm going to go back a little bit in time and choose an album that Andy doesn't like, and that's just another band from LA. So this album is a live album where the mothers of invention were joined by Flo and Eddie from the Turtles. And Flo and Eddie, they're really just there to be clowns in the circus that was Zappa's concerts at the time. But they were actually more than that. They were great vocalists, first of all, but they were also great comical talents. And in this album, for instance, Flo and Eddie are lampooning a lot of local popular culture of the time. For instance, they're imitating radio commercials, and you don't actually have to know these commercials just to appreciate. I mean, you can just imagine that in the 1960s and 70s, you would have had these type of commercials as what they're lampooning on the radio. So in that sense, it's actually a very interesting time document. The main song that stands out on this album is the first one that takes up the entire first side, and that's Billy the Mountain. And it's like a story in on music of a mountain that goes on vacation. At the same time, there's a lot of political satire in there. They're very funny album. Those guys they had a great sense of humor. So Flo and Eddie, those are Mark Volman and Howard Kalen. And I could totally understand why Andy is not a big fan of this kind of music. It's really kind of out of style. It's very different from anything else Frank Zappa has done. But I think it's an interesting time in his career, and the music is very accessible, and it is actually musically very interesting because Mark Volman and Howard Kalen were so amazing vocalists. They could do things that few other singers can do. So they actually sing things that are musically really interesting. And for that alone, I think it's worth to pay attention to what's on these albums. So with that, let's go to the next one. So album number 6 on Andy's list is Sheik Yerbouti from 1979. So we're moving a little forward in time. And once again, Andy nails it with this album. This really is one of the best albums that Frank Zappa made. It's also one of his most accessible albums. Now, the title, Shake Your Booty, is actually a pun on a disco hit, Shake Your Booty, by Casey and the Sunshine Band. So this is a very consistently high quality album. So let's see what's on this album. Here, one of the songs that I think I enjoy a lot is Flakes. Uh, the word flakes, if you're North American, you would know exactly what that means. If you're not North American, you probably don't. A flake or a flaky person is someone who is too scatterbrained or unreliable, or too unstable, so to speak, too wishy-washy to be reliable. Apparently, that type of person is very common in California. It's a word before I moved to Canada in 2005, I'll have more to say about that soon. I only knew that word from this Frank Zappa song, and then was surprised to see when I lived in Canada, people were actually using that word and to indicate the kind of people that Frank Zappa is singing about. So I thought that was really cool, actually. Some of the songs, like for instance, "I'm So Cute," Jones Crusher, and my favorite one, where is it? "Trying to Grow a Chin," are sung by Terry Bozzio. Now, Terry Bozzio is worth talking about. He is one of Frank Zappa's best drummers, and definitely the most memorable one, I would say, just because of his personality. Bozzio very technically very strong drummer. He's probably most known for the group Missing Persons, which is a group. Terry Bozzio is probably most known for the group Missing Persons, which is a group that he put together with his then wife Dale Bozzio. A song that you might know is Walking in LA. Now, going back to the album, one of my least favorite songs on this album, but actually a very important song in a sense, is City of Tiny Lights, and that's because that song features Adrian Belew, and Adrian Belew is also known for the work that he's done with King Crimson. So, very important musician in his own right. There's lots of musicians that started their career with Frank Zappa and then had very established careers after, or at least had Frank Zappa as their very early bands that they played in. Another one, it would be Steve Vai, for instance, who started playing with Zappa when he was about 20. He's on one or two albums in the list, but I don't have much to say about him here, although he's one of my absolute favorite guitarists. So it's good that I have an opportunity to talk about him now, even though we're not yet there. So the main singles on this album are, let's see, there's Bobby Brown and Dancing Fool. Those are the two most famous songs from this album. That first one, Bobby Brown, is somewhat controversial because of the lyrics. Another controversial song on here is Jewish Princess. Where is that? Where is Jewish Princess? Oh, here it is, number 16. Controversial because many people think it is insulting. I'll get back to that song later. My favorite songs on this album, and Andy talks about that at length as well in his video, Wild Love and Yo Mama. That's the last two songs of the album. They're amazing and they fit really well together on the album. The guitar solo, particularly of Yo Mama, is quite something. So that's it for Shake Your Booty. Let's move on to the next album. So album number 7 on Andy's list is Shut Up and Play Your Guitar. It was released in 1981. And he is right in the sense that this is one of the essential albums for hardcore Zappa fans, but it's not an album for beginners, not at all. And I speak from personal experience here. And that's the reason why I don't think this album should be included, and it's not going to be included in my list. I can say I know what I'm talking about because this was the very first Frank Zappa album that I bought. I was young, probably 17 or so. I was intrigued by this Zappa person and I wanted to know more about him, and then so I started buying albums, and the first album I bought was this one. It was not easy. There were probably 50 or 60 albums already available at the time. We're talking about 1987, 1988. And so I just picked something. I should have read the title more carefully and taken it more seriously. Shut Up and Play Your Guitar, because that's exactly what this album is. It's a bunch of guitar solos. Now, Frank Zappa's guitar solos, they're amazing, but they're also kind of muddy, I find. Not very accessible sometimes. It's something you really have to develop a taste for. And I've developed a taste for it over the years, but back when I bought this album, I was really not ready for it. It was very hard to listen to, and so it was quite a disappointment. The first solo on this album is 555, and that refers to the time signature of the solo. So you have 555, and that's For a beginner, that's maybe not an ideal way to have your first introduction to Frank Zappa. So that didn't really work for me. Over time, this title 555 actually became something that had personal significance for me because I moved to Canada on May the 5th, 2005. So 555. There's some other tracks that I learned to appreciate a lot, and particularly the title song, so to speak. That's this one, Shut Up and Play Your Guitar, on the first album, Shut Up and Play Your Guitar Some More on the second album, and Return of the Son of Shut Up and Play Your Guitar. You'll see these are all solos from Inca Roads. And when you look at the dates, those are three consecutive dates. Those are concerts. The Hammersmith Odeon, is that in London? I think that's in London. And when you listen to the three solos and the differences between them, it really drives home how much Zappa was improvising during these solos. And these are really good solos, and a lot of the solos improvised. So it really gives you a real appreciation for what an amazing guitarist he was, and what a creative guitarist he was. In that sense, it was a very good choice. It is an essential Zappa album, but not an album for beginners. So, what do I put instead? Well, I put nothing instead. I'm going to add another album at the end to replace this one. So, from now on, we're kind of off in our rankings. So, Andy's eighth album is going to be my seventh album. So, let's see what Andy has in store for us for the next album. So the eighth album on Andy's list is Joe's Garage, and that's my seventh album. And that's a good choice, keeping this one. It's a kind of a rock opera that tells you the story of a rock band that is operating in some kind of a dystopian society where music is in the process of being banned. And so Joe is the one of the main characters, or the main protagonist, I would say, in the story. But the main character of the story is actually the narrator, and that is a thing that calls itself the central scrutinizer. And this character claims that its first duty is to enforce all the laws that haven't been passed yet. And that probably sounds ridiculous, but when you think about it, in today's world, you can get, there are some countries, Western countries, where you can go to prison for the things that you put on Facebook, for instance. Even if you have put them on Facebook before these laws were in place that allow them to arrest you for that, and even if you've already deleted those posts in the meantime. So that is not very different from how the central scrutinizer describes his duty. The second responsibility of the central scrutinizer is to tell listeners about the potential consequences of some dangerous activities, such as playing music, which could lead to the death penalty or affect your parents' credit rating. So that's a very Zappa way of explaining things. It shows you his contrived sense of humor. Now, Andy has a lot to say about that. This is obviously a very anti-censorship album, and that is something that Andy cares a lot about. And he spends probably about 5 minutes, from about minute 30 to minute 35, of his video talking about these topics. And I really encourage you to have a listen to that, because Andy has some very serious things to say about that. But back to the album started as kind of a loose collection of songs. And then as time went on and they were trying to put that together into an album, they kind of saw that there was a story in it, and so they kind of made a musical out of it. One of the early songs that was on there, let me go to the Wikipedia page. One of the early songs that was written for Joe's Garage before it really became kind of a musical is this song Catholic Girls. And this song was actually written in response to the pushback against the song Jewish Princess on Sheik Yerbouti, when people said that Jewish Princess was anti-Semitism. Frank Zappa responded that he would show that he was not an anti-Semite by insulting women from a different religious minority, so that he was not singling out Jewish people. That's the kind of logic that Zappa follows. I think it's actually funny. I understand that some people don't appreciate that kind of humor, but what can I say? There's a couple of really interesting songs on here. I think my favorite is probably towards the end, Watermelon and Easter Hay. Very beautiful guitar solo. For the rest, it's because it's kind of like a musical. The lyrics are more important than the actual music. So I mean, some of it has really uh, interesting, are really interesting musically. Like Wet T-shirt Night, for instance, has like a atonal instrumental part in it, which is really impressive, which I really enjoy. Uh, this album features Dale Bosio, which that's a person I've already mentioned from Missing Persons. She plays the role of Mary, and Mary is the girlfriend of Joe, the protagonist, early on in the story, who has her own musical misadventures as a groupie. It's a really silly story, but it has dark undertones because it describes a dystopian future. Um, the cover, as you can guess, is controversial in today's world because of the sensitivities that people have developed in the meantime, but I don't think it was meant to be in any way insulting or controversial. I think it was just portraying musicians as black sheep, essentially. And that's all I have to say about this album. So let's move on to Andy's ninth choice. Andy's ninth choice is You Are What You Is. That will be my eighth album, and I will include it in my list, even though it's not my favorite album. I think it's probably the weakest album on the list, in my opinion, even though Andy feels that it's one of his best. And the reason I disagree is it's again a very satirical album, but it's another album where the satire kind of gets so in the way of the musicality. And I feel the same way about the other very satirical album, the very early one. We're only in it for the money. These are albums where I think the satire is laid on so thick that it stops being funny and it takes away from the musicality. And to me, that's kind of unfortunate. So, but nevertheless, it is a good album. I'm not going to deny that. So let's take a look at some of the songs on there. An interesting one is the second song, Harder Than Your Husband. This is sung by Jimmy Carl Black, who is a Native American, and it's essentially a sequel of a song that was on the album 200 Motels, a album of the late 60s based on a movie that Zappa made. Kind of a misadventure in the sense that they ran out of money before they shot even half of the material for the movie, so they really had to be very creative in patching together a more or less coherent movie out of that, which of course was not coherent at all. But one of the interesting songs on there was Lonesome Cowboy Bird. It's a cowboy song sung by a Native American, which again shows you the kind of derived sense of humor Frank Zappa had. And this album, Harder Than Your Husband, is essentially another country song, which kind of reminds a lot of Lonesome Cowboy Bird. It might look like it has a suggestive title, but when you actually listen to the lyrics, it's actually it just wants you to think that, but it's the lyrics are actually go in a very different direction. Let's see, some songs are musically quite interesting. Um, I think another one of the more interesting songs is the last one, Drafted Again, which is a kind of re-recording of the song I Don't Want to Get Drafted, which was a single that Frank Zappa released in 1980. For the rest, this is an album that I never really got into, so I can't really say that much about it. It's not a bad album, but I think it is overrated. And that brings us to the last selection of Andy. So the last album on Andy's list is Ship Arriving Too Late to Save a Drowning Witch. And Andy thinks this is an absolutely essential album, and I 100% agree with that. I think it belongs in this list, and it is my ninth album. So let's go to the songs on there. Um, the most the song that really jumps out there is Valley Girl. It was sung by his daughter Moon, or talked by his daughter Moon Unit. And he tells you the story from about 39 minutes and 50 seconds into the video, and it takes about a minute. I'm not going to repeat it here. I think if you want to see it, you're going to have to go to Andy's original video and watch it there. But it's a really interesting story of how this song came about. Um, and the funny thing is that this became Frank Zappa's biggest hit, at least in the United States, and it was a collaboration with his daughter. It's actually a really beautiful story. But musically, the most interesting part of this album is side two. You have three songs on there: Drowning Witch, Envelopes, and Teenage Prostitute, and they segue into each other, so it actually is three parts of one suite of songs. And it's amazing. It's one of the best musical pieces put together that Zappa wrote, and that's saying quite something. There is something quite quirky about the last one, Teenage Prostitute, that Andy didn't mention, probably because he's British and not American. That song was being sung by Lisa Popel. Now, who is Lisa Popel? She is the daughter of Samuel Popel and the half sister of Ron Popel. Those are very well known inventors in the United States. Samuel Popel was the inventor of the pocket fisherman, and Ron Popel was the inventor of the Veg-O-Matic. Now, if you're American of a certain age and you watch late night TV, you've probably seen endless commercials about these products because that was Ron Popel's strength, really. That's he was a great advertiser. He would buy up advertisement time when it was cheap in the middle of the night, and he would just play long demonstrations of the gadgets that they made and that they sold. And that's why these people are so well known in American popular culture. But if you don't live in the United States, you wouldn't know about that. So there it is. For those people who are American, I think this is an interesting piece of information. So this song, the last song on this album, was sung by the half sister of Ron Popeil. So that's number 9 on my list, which means I can add another album. And there's a number of suggestions that Andy already made to extend his list. One of the albums he mentions in that context is for on the 1988 tour. And there were 3 albums that came out from that tour. And Andy, I think he recommends Make a Jazz Noise here, but I recommend a different album. And that album is Broadway the Hard Way. And I choose this one because it's a very accessible album. It's really Zappa for beginners, and that's actually why this album was made in the first place. It was this tour, at least the North American part of the tour, was put together to encourage young people to go and vote in the 1988 presidential election. And so he really put together a set for that particular purpose. A very satirical, very accessible, and satirical in a good way. It's in these songs of this album, the satire does not get in the way of the music. A very pleasant, very fun album. It's another one of those albums, live album, where you can clearly hear that the musicians have a lot of fun during the concert, and I always enjoy that. So let's see what are some of the memorable songs. I'll go to the CD version. The most memorable song, in my opinion, is the last song on there, Jesus Thinks You're a Jerk, which is a song in which he criticizes TV evangelists. But there's quite a few interesting songs on there. He's got, for instance, Why Don't You Like Me? That is a song where he uh, mocks Michael Jackson. And it is actually uh, a different song of his called Tell Me You Love Me, an old song of Frank Zappa. Just changed the lyrics and it becomes Why Don't You Like Me? And what's really remarkable is that he segues from his own song into Billie Jean and then back into his own song, and it's done so seamlessly that if you didn't know Billie Jean, you wouldn't notice that it was actually moving into a different song. Very impressive how he does that. In a sense, this album taught me a big lesson of life because in 1988 I was a student. I was about to start university. I had a couple of Frank Zappa albums. As you know, the uh, Shut Up and Play Your Guitar was one of them. And I saw that Zappa was on tour and was going to do a concert in my hometown of Ghent, Belgium. And I really thought long about whether I should go to this concert, and I decided not to go because I knew he had 50, 60 albums, and of those I had maybe 3 or 4. And I felt that I wasn't experienced enough in his music to appreciate this concert, so I ended up not going. And then when I bought this very accessible, very fun album, I really regretted not going there, and that really taught me that in life you always regret the things the most that you don't do, not the things that you do. And I still kind of live by that principle. Um, Maybe I wouldn't have started a YouTube channel if I hadn't learned that lesson. So, for what it's worth, I think that's something good to be aware of. And that concludes my top 10. By all means, check out Andy Edwards' channel if you haven't already. I will put a link in the description. It's great fun. If you like irreverent humor, you're going to really enjoy his videos. Probably, in particular, the ones that have a negative title, because Andy can really go off into rants. Um, he's kind of the kind of person that Jonathan Pye pretends to be, but will never be because his rants are rehearsed, they are scripted, whereas Andy Edwards does the real thing, the rants that are completely off the cuff and unscripted, and they they can be taken the wrong way sometimes. So you should not be too sensitive if you're going to listen to those. But if you uh, are not too sensitive, it's well worth listening to those rants because they're just amazing. And at the same time, what always strikes me is the sillier the video, the more serious the video. That's seems to be a rule with Andy. Some of his very silly videos have a very serious underlying topic, and sometimes that topic isn't even clear and only becomes clear during the video that he's actually talking about a very serious subject. He just does so in a silly way, and I think that's very typically British. The British can be funny and serious at the same time. Um, so there you have it. I hope you like this video. If you do, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.